Well, head coach Dave Aranda worked a minor miracle in his second year at Baylor in 2021. Aranda squeezing every ounce of talent out of the Bears. They won a Big 12 championship, recorded a school record 12 wins, and won the Sugar Bowl over Ole Miss. But going into 2022, not only do they have a target on their backs, but they have holes to fill on both sides of the ball. The good news for Baylor, the talent is there to at least contend again, but the jury is out on whether they can replicate last year's Cinderella season. The CBS Sports preseason top 25 countdown continuing. And as we hit the top 10, we're now taking on each team individually with a deep dive into how they're shaping up for the season ahead. Baylor, the first of those, sitting at number 10. All right, so let's get into it with CBS Sports college football writer Tom Fornelli. Tom, also one half of the Cover 3 podcast alongside Chip Patterson. Tom, Baylor only has 6 double-digit winning seasons in their history. When you look at this team coming off of what happened last year, what's the ceiling for them in 2022?
Well, they're coming off the Big 12 championship last year, and you said this is a team that's only won 10 games in a season 6 times in their history. They won 10 games. I feel like what we saw last year, winning the Big 12, getting to the Sugar Bowl, is probably a reliable ceiling for what that program can hit. And I think coming into this new season, I think we should probably expect a little bit of a drop-off with the Bears as you look at the odds for things, and we'll talk later about odds of winning the Big 12 again and repeating as champs. They're currently the 4th favorite in the conference. Spoiler alert, I think that's a little bit low. I still think they will be one of the better teams in the Big 12, but you look around at the rest of the conference, you think Oklahoma, who had another great season last year but was low for their standards, will still be good. Texas might improve. Oklahoma State was about a yard short of beating Baylor in the Big 12 championship last year. So there's a lot of competition at the top of the conference, but I think the Bears are going to be in the fight for it all season long.
So let's talk about sophomore Blake Shapen, who's now QB1 for this team. And quarterback coach Sean Bell says Shapen has, quote, a lot of natural ability. But he only had 2 starts last season, Tom. So there are some questions here.
Yeah, Shapen, we haven't seen a ton of him. Gary Bohannon was the regular starter last season. And what I thought was a pretty cool move by Dave Aranda in an era with the transfer portal where you see coaches tend to hold their cards close to their vest to keep players from transferring. He told Bohannon in the spring, listen, we're going with Blake Shapen as our starting quarterback this year, and it gave Bohannon a chance to enter the transfer portal and find a new gig. And the reason they went with Shapen is because if you look at Baylor's offense last year, Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator, calls it the RVO Offense, which stands for Reliable and Violent Offense. And that is a very apt description for what they did. They ran the ball a lot, and they ran it well, but they were a bit too left-handed at times because the passing game really did not provide the kind of explosiveness that you want. While they were efficient when it came to things like yards per attempt, yards per completion, and explosive play rate, they were below average nationally. And that's where they believe somebody like Blake Shapen will be an upgrade on Bohannon, who was not a very good quarterback and suffered from accuracy issues when pushing the ball down the field. That is something they plan to think Shapen will be able to improve. Add that dimension to the offense, allow them to push the ball further downfield and become a little bit more dynamic and give opposing defenses something to be worried about. And I think that's one of the elements that was missing last year. And if Shapen is able to bring it, that's why I think Baylor's still going to be pretty good in 2022.
So, Tom, what kind of weapons does Shapen have in this offense? I mean, they have a ton of holes to fill on that side of the ball.
Yeah, like I mentioned, they ran the ball a lot last year, and it's hard to blame them for doing it because they were very good at it. If you look at their numbers, they ran the ball 63% of the time, which was the 13th most nationally of 130 teams, but their 5.38 yards per carry ranked 10th. But the two workhorses who were responsible for that, Abram Smith and Treston Ebner, are now both currently in NFL training camps, and they took a whole lot of production along with them, over 2,400 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns. They were also both threats out of the backfield, and they were also both threats as returners on special teams. So it's a lot of production to replace, and it's probably going to be a committee approach in the run game. You've got some veteran players on the squad like Tay McWilliams, Craig Williams, and Josh Fleeks, who are likely to see carries. But one person I would keep an eye out for is somebody who could possibly sneak into the rotation and become a bigger threat as the season goes on. Freshman running back Richard Reese. He is the first running back that this new offensive staff recruited itself to Waco because they feel he's a great fit for what they want to do in that reliable and violent offense. So while early in the year I wouldn't expect Reese to have a major impact, I think as the year goes on, he's somebody who could emerge as a pretty big threat for this team.
And certainly good news for Shapen and the running back core is the fact that this is a good offensive line. They should be able to open holes and give protection to the quarterback. All right, on defense, coordinator Ron Roberts needs to replace All-America safety Jalen Petrie, linebacker Terrell Bernard, and safety JT Woods, but he actually thinks this defense could be better. What do you think, Tom?
It's going to be hard to be better because this was a very good defense, but I will give this Baylor staff the benefit of the doubt because, Dave Aranda cut his teeth in coaching as an excellent defensive coordinator all over the country. So when it comes to a Dave Aranda team, I expect they're going to be good defensively. They're going to be sound. They're going to be smart. And you mentioned the players that they lose. If there's a stat, too often we focus on returning starters and we don't pay enough attention to who those starters were and what they were able to do for the defense. Thankfully, ESPN writer Bill Connolly and friend of the Cover 3 podcast, he has a returning production ranking that he does that shows Baylor ranks 113th this year as far as returning production on defense, which is bad. But ironically enough, you mentioned a couple of the key players from the secondary that are gone. A few years ago in the Big 12, having to replace half your secondary would have been a huge deal because this was the conference of the spread and the air raid and throwing the ball all over the field. But we've seen in recent years, outside of Oklahoma and Texas Tech, the Big 12 is kind of, morphed into more of a run-heavy kind of and defense complementary football approach that we typically haven't seen. So in a way, having to replace that much of your secondary might not be as big of a blow or as big of a detriment for the Bears going into 2022. They still have a lot of returners up front on the defensive line, which I think gives them a solid foundation to at least make sure that even if there is a slight step back from this unit as a whole, it's not this, the floor is not going to fall out from beneath them. They're still going to be good defensively. And if we see some of that improvement offensively, like I mentioned with Shapen bringing more of a dynamic offense, more passing explosiveness, it could balance it out and make sure that Baylor, while maybe they're not as good defensively, being better offensively will help balance it out and make sure they're still able to win Big 12 games.
Tom, the Bears come into this season on a 5-game winning streak. They open up against non-conference Albany, but looking at this schedule, it is a gauntlet, especially on the road.
Yeah, it's a tough one that they're going to have to get through. And of course, in the Big 12, they play the round robin schedule. So you never get to dodge anybody. And you mentioned the road game. Iowa State, that's going to be a tough trip. West Virginia's a tough trip. Texas Tech is a team that I think you need to watch out for. And then when you get Oklahoma and Texas on the road, that's not the best luck. So it's like you much prefer last year when you got both of those teams coming to Waco. Having to go on the road to face them this season makes things a lot more difficult. There's also the BYU game in the non-conference slate. Baylor is not going to be taking it easy in 2022. So that's one of the factors that they're going to have to overcome. And I think, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I'm still skeptical about their chances to win the conference, even if I think they're going to be a very good team.
All right, so let's talk big picture then. I mean, how do you like their chances? What do you peg those at to repeat as Big 12 champions?
I mentioned earlier, coming into the season right now, the odds on them to win the Big 12 are plus 650. But more importantly, they're the fourth favorite in the conference. Oklahoma is the clear favorite, followed by Texas and then Oklahoma State. But honestly, I think Baylor should be the second best team as far as the odds are concerned. So I look at those odds, and while I don't think Baylor's going to win the Big 12, I think that's a very good bet because Texas, you look at it, Quinn Ewers is a highly rated quarterback prospect who everybody is very high on. But the fact of the matter is, we've never seen the kid take a snap on a field at the college level, and Texas is not exactly a team known for living up to preseason expectations. Oklahoma State came within a yard of beating Baylor in the Big 12 championship last year, but its defensive coordinator, the kind of mastermind behind the turnaround in Stillwater the last few years, he's left to become the defensive coordinator at Ohio State. So it's reasonable to think we're going to see a defensive drop-off from the Cowboys that we're not going to see from Baylor. I think the offense is going to be better. So I think it's a good play. Again, I would pick Oklahoma to win the conference, but I would take Baylor before I took Texas or Oklahoma State.
He is CBS Sports college football writer Tom Fornelli breaking down the Baylor Bears as we enter the top 10 of our CBS Sports preseason top 25. Thanks very much, Tom. Great to see you. And of course, Tom, also part of the Cover 3 podcast alongside Chip Patterson. You can bet they're going to be taking deep dives into all top teams in the top 25. The preseason rankings from 1 through 131 are available over on CBSSports.com. You can listen to the Cover 3, download and follow wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.